Amira Al-Fayed stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, her diamond-encrusted gown shimmering under the opulent chandeliers of the Ritz Paris. The annual Midnight in Paris gala was in full swing, with the crème de la crème of international society mingling and gossiping over champagne and canapés. As the heiress to the Al-Fayed empire, Amira was used to being the center of attention at such events. Tonight, however, she felt suffocated by the very air she breathed. "Darling, you simply must tell us when you're planning to settle down," cooed Madame Beaumont, an aging socialite with more plastic in her face than sincerity in her words. "A woman of your status can't remain single forever. What about that charming Saudi prince I introduced you to last month?" Amira forced a polite smile, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening around the stem of her champagne flute. "I appreciate your concern, Madame Beaumont, but I'm quite content focusing on our family's business ventures for now." "Oh, but my dear," interjected another woman, her voice dripping with faux concern, "surely you don't want to end up a spinster. Your family's legacy must be continued, after all." The words hit Amira like a physical blow, though she maintained her composure. She'd heard variations of this conversation countless times before, but tonight, something inside her snapped. The weight of expectations, the constant scrutiny, the feeling that her entire existence was nothing more than a carefully curated performance. It all came crashing down around her. "If you'll excuse me, ladies," Amira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed by the heat. I think I'll step out for some air." Before anyone could protest, Amira made her way through the crowd, nodding politely to acquaintances, but avoiding eye contact. She retrieved her coat from the attendant and stepped out into the crisp Parisian night. For a moment, she stood on the sidewalk, breathing deeply and trying to calm her racing heart. The city of lights sprawled before her, beautiful and indifferent to her inner turmoil. On impulse, Amira walked to where her chauffeur was waiting with her Rolls-Royce Phantom. "Mademoiselle Al-Fayed," the driver said, moving to open the door. "Are you ready to return to the hotel?" "No, Jacques," Amira replied, a strange glint in her eye. "Take me somewhere different, somewhere real." The driver hesitated, confusion evident on his face. "I'm not sure I understand, mademoiselle. Where would you like to go?" Amira paused, considering. She'd spent her entire life in a bubble of luxury, surrounded by people who wore masks as expertly crafted as her own. For once, she wanted to see beyond that veil of pretense. "Take me to the outskirts of the city," she said finally, "where the real people live, where there are no masks, no pretenses." Jacques looked concerned but nodded. "As you wish, mademoiselle. But I must advise caution. Perhaps it would be wiser to return to the gala or the hotel." "No," Amira said firmly. "I need this, Jacques. Please." With obvious reluctance, the chauffeur opened the car door for her. As Amira settled into the plush leather seat, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. She was about to step into a world entirely foreign to her, leaving behind the gilded cage that had been her life for so long. As the car glided through the streets of Paris, Amira watched the scenery change. The grand boulevards and designer boutiques gave way to narrower streets lined with graffiti-covered walls. The farther they drove from the city center, the more Amira felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Finally, Jacques pulled the car to a stop in a dimly lit neighborhood. "We're here, mademoiselle, but I really must insist that we don't stay long. This area isn't safe, especially at this hour." Amira nodded, but her attention was focused on the scene outside the car window. A group of people huddled around a burning barrel, seeking warmth in the chilly night air. Their clothes were worn and patched, a far cry from the designer labels Amira was accustomed to. Without warning, Amira opened the car door and stepped out. Jacques called after her in alarm, but she barely heard him. She was transfixed by the raw humanity before her, so different from the artificial world she'd left behind. As she approached the group, conversations died down and all eyes turned to her. Amira realized how out of place she must look, an Arabic woman in a couture gown and priceless jewels, standing in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Paris. For a moment, Amira hesitated, unsure of what to do or say. Then, driven by an impulse she couldn't quite explain, she spoke. "I'll pay a substantial sum to anyone willing to accompany me for the rest of the night," she announced, her voice carrying in the stillness. The group exchanged glances, a mix of surprise, suspicion, and curiosity on their faces. Some laughed. Nervously, others looked interested. But one man, sitting slightly apart from the others, caught Amira's attention. He was lean and weathered, with intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through her. Unlike the others, he didn't seem shocked or enticed by her offer. Instead, he regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and, was that disdain? Intrigued, Amira approached him directly. "What about you?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Would you be willing to accompany me?" The man looked up at her, his gaze steady and unimpressed. "I'm not for sale," he said simply, his voice carrying a hint of an accent Amira couldn't quite place. His response, so different from what she'd expected, caught Amira off guard. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely challenged. This man, with nothing to his name, had more dignity than most of the wealthy individuals she knew. I didn't mean to offend," Amira said, feeling strangely flustered. I need someone to talk to. Someone real." The man's expression softened slightly, but he still didn't budge. "If you want to talk, talk, but I won't be bought, not even for a night." Amira felt a strange mix of emotions, frustration, admiration, and an odd sense of hope. This man was unlike anyone she'd ever met, and she found herself desperate to understand him. "What if," she began, an idea forming. "What if I donate the money to help everyone here instead? Would you consider accompanying me then?" The man raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her suggestion. He looked around at the others, many of whom were now watching their exchange with keen interest. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said, "but on one condition. We go where I choose, not to some fancy hotel or club." Amira felt a thrill of excitement and nervousness. She was about to step even further out of her comfort zone, guided by a stranger she'd just met. But for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. "Agreed," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Amira." The man stood, his movements graceful. Despite his ragged appearance, he took her hand, his grip firm and calloused. "Luke," he said simply. "Now let's see if you're really ready for a taste of the real world, princess." As Amira followed Luke away from the group, she could hear Jacques calling after her in panic. But she didn't look back. For better or worse, she had taken the first step on a journey that would change her life forever. The unlikely pair made their way through the labyrinthine streets of Paris's underbelly, a stark contrast to the opulent world Amira had left behind. Luke walked with purpose, his stride confident, despite his worn shoes and tattered coat. Amira struggled to keep up, her designer heels clicking against the uneven pavement. "Where exactly are we going?" Amira asked, a hint of apprehension in her voice. Luke glanced back at her, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Somewhere real, isn't that? What you wanted." They turned down a narrow alley, the walls on either side covered in vibrant street art. The scent of fresh bread wafted through the air, mingling with the less pleasant odors of the city's forgotten corners. Amira found herself both fascinated and overwhelmed by the sensory assault. Finally, Luke stopped in front of a small, unassuming door. A faded sign above read, "Le cœur brisé," the broken heart. Without hesitation, he pushed the door open and gestured for Amira to enter. The interior was dimly lit, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in photographs and memorabilia. A handful of patrons sat at the bar or huddled around small tables, their conversations a low murmur beneath the soft jazz playing from an old jukebox. "Luke," the bartender, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, called out. "It's been too long, and who's your friend?" "Evening, Marie," Luke replied, guiding Amira to a secluded corner table. "This is Amira. She's exploring." Marie raised an eyebrow but didn't comment further. She brought over 2 glasses of red wine, setting them down with a gentle clink. "So, princess," Luke said, leaning back in his chair, "what made you decide to slum it with us commoners tonight?" Amira bristled at his tone but took a deep breath. She had asked for this, after all. I'm tired of the facade, she admitted, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. Every day it's the same routine. Smile, nod, play the part of the perfect heiress. But inside I feel empty. Luke's expression softened slightly. And you thought throwing money at strangers would fill that void? I don't know what I thought, Amira replied, frustration evident in her voice. I just knew I couldn't stand another minute in that ballroom, surrounded by people who only see me as a means to an end. And what do you see when you look at... Just, Luke challenged. Entertainment? A way to assuage your guilt? Amira opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips. She realized she didn't have an answer. What had she expected to find in this unfamiliar world? As if sensing her inner turmoil, Luke's tone softened. Look, I'm not here to judge you, but if you want to understand the real world, as you put it, you need to open your eyes and really see the people around you. He gestured to a couple seated at the bar. See them? That's John and Marielle. They've been coming here every Friday for 30 years. John lost his job at the factory last month, but they still scraped together enough for their weekly date night. Amira followed his gaze, taking in the gentle way the couple leaned into each other, their love evident despite the worry lines etched on their faces. And over there, Luke continued, nodding towards a group of young people laughing over a shared plate of fries. Art students. They pool their money to afford supplies and take turns modeling for each other. They're creating beauty with whatever they can find. As Luke painted a picture of the lives that intersected in this small bar, Amira felt a shift in her perspective. These weren't just nameless faces or statistics. They were people with dreams, struggles, and stories of their own. What about you? Amira asked softly. What's your story, Luke? For a moment, Luke was silent, his eyes fixed on the glass in front of him. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. I had a life not so different from yours once. Business empire, fancy parties, the works. Then I trusted the wrong person, and it all came crashing down. Amira leaned forward, captivated. What happened? My business partner, someone I considered a brother, embezzled millions and framed me for it, Luke explained, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. By the time I cleared my name, the company was in ruins, and my reputation was shot. I lost everything. My home, my savings, my so-called friends. That's terrible, Amira said, genuine sympathy in her voice. How did you end up here? Luke shrugged. I wandered for a while, trying to figure out who I was without all the trappings of success. Ended up in Paris, drawn by memories of happier times. Marie gave me a job washing dishes, let me sleep in the storage room. Slowly I started rebuilding my life, on my terms this time. As Luke spoke, Amira found herself re-evaluating her initial impressions of him. The strength and dignity she had sensed earlier took on new meaning. Here was a man who had faced adversity and emerged stronger, if a bit battered. Do you ever think about going back? Amira asked. To your old life, I mean. Luke's laugh was tinged with irony. Sometimes. But then I look around this place at the friends I've made, the simplicity of my life now. I'm not sure I'd trade it for all the luxury in the world. His words struck a chord in Amira. She thought of her own life, the endless social obligations, the pressure to maintain the family legacy, the constant feeling of being watched and judged. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a different path. Tell me more, she said, leaning forward, about your life now, about the people here. I want to understand. And so, as the night deepened, and the patrons of Le Coeur Brisé came and went, Luke shared stories of resilience, community, and unexpected joy. Amira listened, asked questions, and slowly began to see the world through new eyes. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the grimy windows, Amira realized that hours had passed in what felt like minutes. She had laughed more genuinely than she had in years, felt more connected to the stories of strangers than she ever had to her high society acquaintances. I should go, she said reluctantly, aware of the responsibilities waiting for her in her other life. Thank you, Luke. This night, It's given me a lot to think about." Luke nodded, a hint of warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there at the beginning of the night. "Just remember, Princess, the real world isn't a tourist attraction. If you want to make changes in your life or anyone else's, it takes more than one night of slumming it." Amira stood, smoothing down her now wrinkled gown. "I understand, and I think I'd like to learn more, if you're willing to teach me." A slow smile spread across Luke's face. "We'll see. For now, let's get you back to your world before they send out a search party." As they stepped out into the cool morning air, Amira felt as though she was waking from a dream. But the lessons of the night stayed with her. A spark of something new ignited in her heart. She knew that from this moment on, her life would never be the same. The days following her night in the underbelly of Paris passed in a blur for Amira. She went through the motions of her high society life, attending board meetings, charity galas and social luncheons. But her mind constantly drifted back to the dingy bar and the people she'd met there. Luke's words echoed in her thoughts, challenging her perceptions and stirring something deep within her. A week after her adventure, Amira found herself sitting in her opulent office at the Al Fayed Tower, staring out at the Paris skyline. The view was breathtaking, but all she could think about was the stark contrast between this world of glass and steel and the vibrant, gritty reality she'd glimpsed with Luke. A knock on the door interrupted her reverie. "Ms. Al Fayed?" Her assistant Sophie poked her head in. "Your 2 o'clock is here, Mr. Rashid from the Dubai Investment Group." Amira straightened, slipping back into her role as the poised businesswoman. "Thank you, Sophie. Send him in." She stood to greet her visitor. A crazy idea began to form in her mind. She'd been struggling to reconcile her newfound awareness with her current life, and perhaps this was an opportunity to bridge that gap. Mr. Rashid, a distinguished man in his 50s, entered with a confident stride. "Ms. Al Fayed, always a pleasure," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Rashid," Amira replied smoothly. "Before we dive into business, I was hoping to discuss a unique proposition with you." Intrigued, Mr. Rashid settled into one of the plush chairs across from her desk. "I'm all ears, my dear." Amira took a deep breath, steeling herself. "As you know, our companies have been looking to expand our corporate social responsibility initiatives. I have an idea for a project that could make a real difference while also providing valuable insights for our business strategies." She outlined her plan, a program to identify and mentor promising individuals from underprivileged backgrounds, providing them with education, resources, and opportunities within the Al Fayed and Rashid business empires. "The catch," Amira continued, her heart racing, "is that we wouldn't just be helping them. We'd be learning from them as well. Their perspectives, their experiences, they could provide invaluable insights into markets and demographics we've struggled to understand." Mr. Rashid listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Amira finished, he was silent for a long moment. She held her breath, wondering if she'd overstepped. Finally, he spoke. "It's an unconventional approach, Ms. Al Fayed, but I must admit it's intriguing. How do you propose we start?" Relief washed over Amira, quickly followed by excitement. "I actually have someone in mind for our pilot program, a man I met recently who has experience in both worlds. He was once a successful businessman before losing everything. His insights could be invaluable." As they hammered out the details of the program, Amira felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. This was more than just another corporate initiative. It was a chance to create real change, both in her life and in the lives of others. Later that evening, Amira found herself once again standing outside Le Coeur Brisé. She'd traded her designer suit for more casual attire, hoping to blend in better this time. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The bar was busier than her previous visit, filled with the after-work crowd. Amira scanned the room, her heart sinking when she didn't immediately spot Luke. Had she misunderstood their connection? Was he avoiding her? Looking for someone? Marie's voice startled her. The bartender was regarding her with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Yes, Amira admitted. "Is Luke here?" Marie's expression softened. He's in the back, helping with inventory. I'll let him know you're here." As Amira waited, she overheard snippets of conversation around her. A group of teachers discussing budget cuts at their school. A young couple worrying about making rent. An elderly man talking about the rising cost of his medications. Each story added depth to the world Luke had introduced her to, reinforcing her determination to bridge the gap between her two realities. "I didn't expect to see you back here." Luke's voice cut through her thoughts. He stood before her, eyebrow raised questioningly. "I have a proposition for you," Amira said, gesturing to an empty table. As they sat, she outlined her plan, watching Luke's expression carefully. When she finished, Luke leaned back, his face unreadable. "So, you want to use me as your guinea pig, your bridge between the haves and the have-nots?" Amira flinched at his blunt assessment. Yes, in a way, but it's more than that. This could be a chance to make real change, Luke, to give opportunities to people who deserve them, and to open the eyes of those in power to realities they've ignored." Luke was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Finally, he spoke. "And what makes you think I want to go back to that world? I told you I've found peace here." "Have you really?" Amira challenged gently. "Or have you just been hiding? You have so much to offer, Luke. Knowledge, experience, a unique perspective. Imagine the good you could do." She could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between his hard-earned cynicism and the spark of hope her words had ignited. "I'm not asking you to abandon this life," Amira continued. "I'm asking you to help build a bridge between worlds. To be a mentor, a guide, to help shape a program that could change lives." Luke sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that simple, Amira. My past, there are people who would recognize me, who might not have forgotten or forgiven." "Then we'll deal with that," Amira said firmly. "Together. I'm not naive, Luke. I know this won't be easy, but I believe it's worth trying. Will you at least consider it?" The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and trepidation. Finally, Luke nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. That's all I can promise for now." Amira felt a surge of hope. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. As she left the bar that night, she felt as though she was standing on the precipice of something monumental. Two worlds were about to collide, and the aftershocks would change everything. Little did she know the true challenges were yet to come. As news of her unconventional project began to spread, both admiration and opposition would rise to meet her. The comfortable boundaries of her old life were crumbling, and the path ahead was fraught with obstacles she couldn't yet imagine. But for now, as she stepped out into the Parisian night, Amira felt a sense of purpose and excitement she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it head-on, with Luke, she hoped, by her side. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Amira. Her proposal had sparked intense debate within both the Al Fayed and Rashid organizations. While some executives embraced the innovative approach, others were skeptical, even hostile, to the idea of bringing outsiders into their carefully curated world. Amira found herself in endless meetings, passionately defending her vision. "This isn't just about charity," she argued in a particularly tense board meeting. "It's about expanding our perspective, tapping into markets we've overlooked, and developing talent that could revolutionize our industries." Her father, Karim Al-Fayed, watched these proceedings with a mixture of pride and concern. One evening he called Amira into his study. "My dear," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I admire your passion, but I worry you may be taking on more than you realize. Our world, it's not always kind to idealists." Amira met her father's gaze steadily. "I know, Baba, but isn't that all the more reason to try? We have the power to make real change. Shouldn't we use it?" Karim sighed, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You remind me so much of your mother. She always saw the best in people, always wanted to make the world better." His expression grew serious. "Just be careful, Amira. Not everyone will understand or support what you're trying to do." As if to underscore her father's warning, Amira began to notice subtle changes in her social circle. Some friends became distant, while others watched her with newfound curiosity. Whispers followed her at events, a mix of admiration and derision. At a charity auction, Amira overheard a conversation that made her blood boil. "Did you hear about Amira's latest project?" A woman's voice dripped with disdain. "Apparently she's adopting some homeless man, trying to turn him into a businessman. It's like My Fair Lady, but with suits instead of dresses." Laughter followed, and Amira had to resist the urge to confront them. Instead, she channeled her anger into determination. She would prove them wrong, show them the value of looking beyond their narrow worldview. Meanwhile, Luke was grappling with his own challenges. The prospect of re-entering the world he'd left behind filled him with both excitement and dread. He spent long nights at Le Coeur Brisé talking things through with Marie. "You don't owe them anything, you know," Marie said one night, wiping down the bar. "You've built a life here, you're happy." Luke sighed, staring into his glass. "Am I, though? Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. But sometimes I wonder if I'm just hiding, letting my potential go to waste." Marie's expression softened. "You've helped a lot of people here, Luke. That's not nothing." "I know," Luke replied. "But this could be a chance to help on a larger scale, to prevent others from ending up in the situation I was in." After days of internal debate, Luke finally reached out to Amira. They met at a small cafe, neutral ground between their two worlds. "I'm in," Luke said without preamble, "but I have conditions." Amira nodded, relief and excitement washing over her. "Of course, what are they?" "First, I won't abandon my community here. Whatever role I take on, I need to be able to continue my work at the shelter and with Marie." "Absolutely," Amira agreed. "In fact, I was hoping you could help us expand our outreach to more communities like yours." Luke nodded, a hint of a smile on his face. "Second, I won't be your puppet or your charity case. If I'm going to do this, I need to have a real say in how the program is developed and implemented." "That's the whole point," Amira said earnestly. "We need your insights, your experience. You'll be a full partner in this, Luke." As they hashed out the details, Amira felt a growing sense of excitement. This was really happening. They were about to embark on something that could change lives, challenge perceptions, and bridge worlds. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Luke was introduced to key members of the Al-Fayed and Rashid organizations, his sharp mind and unique perspective immediately making an impression. Amira watched with pride as he held his own in discussions with seasoned executives, offering insights they had never considered. However, not everyone was as receptive. Amira noticed the barely concealed disdain in some eyes, the whispers that followed Luke through the halls of power. She realized that changing minds would be a far greater challenge than changing policies. One afternoon, as they left a particularly grueling meeting, Luke pulled Amira aside. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I don't want to cause problems for you or your family." Amira squeezed his arm reassuringly. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We're doing the right thing, Luke. It won't be easy, but it'll be worth it." As they walked out of the Al-Fayed Tower together, heads held high despite the curious and sometimes hostile glances, Amira felt a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. They were an unlikely pair, the privileged heiress and the man who had lost everything. But together they were poised to shake the foundations of a world that desperately needed change. Little did they know, their challenges were only beginning. As news of their partnership spread, it would attract attention from unexpected quarters, both positive and negative. The comfortable boundaries of Amira's old life were crumbling, and the path ahead was fraught with obstacles neither of them could yet imagine. But for now, as they stepped out into the bustling streets of Paris, Amira and Luke shared a look of determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together, armed with their shared vision and the strength of their growing bond. The ripples of change they had set in motion were about to become waves, and the world, both Amira's gilded realm and Luke's gritty reality, would never be the same. As summer faded into autumn, Amira and Luke's project began to take shape. They had established a small but dedicated team, a mix of corporate professionals and community organizers, each bringing unique perspectives to the table. Their pilot program, dubbed Bridge the Gap, was set to launch in just a few weeks. One crisp September morning, Amira stood before a mirror in her penthouse, adjusting her hijab. Today was a crucial day, their first major presentation to potential partners and investors. As she smoothed down her tailored suit, she caught sight of a photo on her dresser. It was a candid shot taken at Le Coeur Brisé, showing her laughing, with Luc and Marie. The contrast between that moment and her current reflection was striking. "You can do this," she told her reflection, drawing strength from the memory of that night and all she had learned since. Across town, Luc was facing his own moment of truth. He stood outside the imposing Al Fayed Tower, heart racing. The last time he'd entered a building like this, he'd been at the height of his success. Now he was starting over, but with a purpose that went beyond personal gain. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his tie, a gift from Amira, and walked through the revolving doors. The presentation room was packed with a mix of corporate executives, philanthropists, and community leaders. Amira could feel the weight of their expectations, the skepticism from some quarters, and the cautious hope from others. As she began her introduction, Amira's voice rang out clear and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today not just to talk about change, but to be the change. Bridge the Gap isn't just another corporate social responsibility initiative. It's a revolution in how we approach business, community, and human potential." She outlined their vision, a program that would identify talented individuals from underprivileged backgrounds, provide them with education, mentorship, and opportunities within major corporations, while simultaneously using their insights to develop new business strategies and reach underserved markets. When it was Luc's turn to speak, there was a palpable shift in the room. Here was living proof of the program's potential. A man who had experienced both extreme success and profound loss, now standing as a bridge between two worlds. Luc's words were passionate and direct. "I've seen both sides of the coin. I've worn custom suits and slept on park benches, and I can tell you, the greatest untapped resource in business today is the perspective of those who have been left behind by traditional systems." As they fielded questions from the audience, Amira and Luc worked in seamless tandem, their synergy evident to all. They addressed concerns about risk, spoke of the potential for social impact and business growth, and painted a vivid picture of a future where success was measured not just in profits, but in lives changed. By the end of the presentation, the energy in the room was electric. Several attendees approached them immediately, eager to get involved. Others lingered, discussing the implications among themselves. It was clear that Bridge the Gap had struck a chord. As the crowd thinned, Amira noticed a familiar face approaching, Hassan Rashid, the son of her father's business partner and a rising star in the corporate world. "Impressive presentation, Amira," Hassan said, his tone a mixture of admiration and something else she couldn't quite place. "You've certainly stirred things up." "Thank you, Hassan," Amira replied cautiously. She had always found Hassan charming, but somewhat inscrutable. "I hope we can count on your support." Hassan's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course, it's an interesting project. I look forward to seeing how it develops." With a nod to Luc, he moved on, leaving Amira with a vague sense of unease. As they packed up their materials, Luc nudged Amira. "Hey, we did it, first hurdle cleared." Amira smiled, feeling a wave of relief and excitement. "We did, but something tells me the real challenges are just beginning." Later that evening, Amira and Luc decided to celebrate their successful presentation at Le Coeur Brisé. As they entered the familiar warmth of the bar, they were greeted by cheers from the regulars who had come to know Amira over the past months. Marie emerged from behind the bar, enveloping them both in a hug. "So, how did it go?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with pride. As Amira and Luc recounted the day's events, sharing both the triumphs and the lingering concerns, they were surrounded by a community that had become a second family to them both. The patrons of Le Coeur Brisé listened intently, offering words of encouragement and practical advice. It was a poignant reminder of why they had embarked on this journey in the first place, to build bridges between worlds that had been separated for far too long. As the night wore on, Amira found herself in a quiet corner with Luke, both nursing glasses of wine. "Are you ready for this?" she asked softly. "Once we launch, there's no going back. Our lives will never be the same." Luke was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. Then he turned to her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Honestly, I haven't felt this alive in years. Whatever comes next, I'm all in." Amira felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine. She raised her glass. "To uncharted waters, then." Luke clinked his glass against hers. "To uncharted waters." As they sat there, surrounded by the gentle hum of conversation and the soft jazz from the jukebox, Amira felt a sense of peace wash over her. They were standing on the brink of something monumental, something that could change countless lives. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Little did they know, the waters they were about to navigate would be far more turbulent than they could have imagined. Forces were already aligning against them, threatened by the change they represented. The coming months would test not only their project, but their personal convictions and the bond they had forged. But for now, in the warm glow of liqueur brisée, surrounded by friends old and new, Amira and Luke allowed themselves to savor their first real victory. The journey ahead was uncertain, but they would face it together, armed with a shared vision and a determination to make a difference. As the night deepened, the seeds of something greater than either of them had imagined began to take root, nurtured by hope, ambition, and the power of human connection. The launch of Bridge the Gap was met with a flurry of media attention. Newspapers and online publications buzzed with articles about the innovative program, some hailing it as a revolutionary approach to corporate social responsibility, others questioning its feasibility and motives. Amira found herself thrust into the spotlight like never before. She had always been a public figure due to her family's status, but now she was becoming known for her own merits and ideas. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming. One morning, as she scrolled through her newsfeed, a headline caught her. Al-Fayed heiress, visionary or naive dreamer. The article, while mostly positive, raised questions about her qualifications and whether she was truly prepared for the challenges ahead. Luke found her staring at her tablet, a frown creasing her brow. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting down 2 cups of coffee. They had taken to starting their days with strategy sessions at a small cafe near the Al-Fayed Tower. Amira sighed, pushing the tablet away. "Just more press. Some of it's not exactly flattering." Luke took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "You know, when I was at the top of my game, I used to say there's no such thing as bad publicity. Now, I'm not so sure. But I do know that what we're doing is worth a few negative headlines." His words brought a smile to Amira's face. "You're right. I just hope we can live up to the expectations we've created." As they discussed their plans for the day, neither noticed the man watching them from across the street, his face hidden behind a newspaper. The first few weeks of the program were a whirlwind of activity. They had selected 20 participants from diverse backgrounds, former convicts looking for a second chance, single mothers struggling to break into male-dominated fields, refugees with untapped skills and burning ambition. Amira and Luke threw themselves into the work, splitting their time between corporate boardrooms and community centers. They faced challenges at every turn: resistant executives, skeptical participants, logistical nightmares. But the moments of triumph made it all worthwhile. One such moment came during a mentoring session Luke was leading. He was working with Aisha, a brilliant young woman who had fled war in her home country and was now trying to build a new life in Paris. "I don't understand," Aisha said, frustration evident in her voice. "I have the skills, I have the experience. Why won't they even give me an interview?" Luke leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes, Aisha, it's not about what you know, but who you know and how you present yourself. Let's work on your networking skills and polish up that resume. Trust me, once they meet you, they won't be able to say no." By the end of the session, Aisha's eyes were shining with renewed determination. As she left, she turned back to Luke. "Thank you. For the first time since I came to this country, I feel like I have a real chance." Moments like these kept Amira and Luke going, even as the pressure mounted. But not everyone was pleased with their success. Hassan Rashid, in particular, seemed to take a keen interest in their project. He frequently attended their events, asked probing questions, and offered assistance that always seemed to come with strings attached. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with the board, Hassan cornered Amira in the hallway. "You're doing remarkable work, Amira," he said, his tone smooth as silk. "But I can't help wondering if you've considered all the implications of your actions." Amira raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, Hassan?" He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "You're shaking up the status quo. Not everyone appreciates that. I'd hate to see you or your friend get hurt in the process." Before Amira could respond, Hassan was gone, leaving her with a chill that had nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. She shared her concerns with Luke later that night as they worked late in their shared office space. "I don't trust him," Luke said, his jaw tightening. "He reminds me too much of the people who brought me down before." Amira nodded, feeling a mix of worry and determination. "We need to be careful, but we can't let fear stop us. We're making real progress, Luke. Look at Aisha, at Marcus, at all the others. We're changing lives." Luke's expression softened. "You're right. And speaking of changing lives," he hesitated, then continued, "I've been thinking maybe it's time I faced my past head-on, clear my name once and for all." Amira's eyes widened. "Are you sure? That could be risky." "I know," Luke replied, running a hand through his hair. "But if I'm going to be an effective mentor and partner in this project, I need to deal with my own baggage. Plus, it might help us anticipate any attacks from people who might try to use my history against us." As they discussed the implications of Luke confronting his past, neither was aware of the storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon. Forces were aligning against them, threatened by the change they represented and the power structures they were challenging. In a luxurious office across town, Hassan Rashid was on the phone, his voice low and urgent. "Yes, I understand the risks, but this project needs to be stopped. They're getting too close to uncovering things we've worked hard to keep buried. Whatever it takes, just make it happen." As he hung up, Hassan stared out at the glittering Paris skyline, a mix of ambition and fear in his eyes. The game was about to change, and he was determined to come out on top, no matter the cost. Back in their office, Amira and Luke worked late into the night, strategizing and planning. Despite the challenges ahead, there was an energy between them, a shared purpose that had grown into something neither of them had anticipated. As Amira looked up from her work, catching Luke's eye, she felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with business. The lines between professional partnership and personal connection were beginning to blur, adding yet another layer of complexity to their already complicated situation. Little did they know, the true tests of their resolve, their partnership, and their growing feelings for each other were just around the corner. The storm was about to break, and it would shake the foundations of everything they had built. The decision to confront his past weighed heavily on Luke. He spent days preparing, gathering old documents, reaching out to contacts from his previous life. Amira watched him with a mixture of admiration and concern, recognizing the internal struggle he was experiencing. One crisp autumn morning, Luke received a call that would change everything. An old business associate, Philippe Moreau, had agreed to meet him. The location was carefully chosen, a small cafe in the outskirts of Paris, neutral ground that offered both privacy and a sense of security. "I'll come with you," Amira insisted when Luke shared the details of the meeting. Luke shook his head. "This is something I need to do alone, but I appreciate your support." The morning of the meeting arrived with a heavy mist hanging over the city. Luke dressed carefully, choosing a suit that spoke of his past success without appearing desperate. As he prepared to leave, Amira pulled him into a tight embrace. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Philippe Moreau was already seated when Luke arrived. The man looked older, more weathered than Luke remembered. Years of corporate battles had etched lines of stress and compromise into his face. "You look different," Philippe said by way of greeting. Life on the streets has changed you. Luke sat down, his posture calm but alert. I'm not here to rehash old arguments, Philippe. I want the truth about what happened. The conversation that followed was a carefully choreographed dance of words. Philippe spoke in measured tones, revealing pieces of a complex puzzle that had destroyed Luke's previous life. He admitted to knowing about the embezzlement that had been pinned on Luke, but stopped short of taking full responsibility. There were forces at play you couldn't understand, Philippe said cryptically. Some battles are better left unfought. Luke pressed harder, sensing there was more to the story. And then, a breakthrough. Philippe revealed a name, a connection, to a larger network of corporate manipulation that had orchestrated Luke's downfall. Meanwhile, Amira was dealing with challenges of her own. Hassan Rashid's increasingly thinly veiled threats had not gone unnoticed. She had begun to dig into his background, using the investigative skills she'd learned from Luke and her own network of contacts. What she discovered was troubling. Hassan had connections to several questionable business deals, including some that intersected with Luke's past. The web was complex, but Amira was determined to unravel it. As Luke's meeting concluded, he felt a mix of emotions, relief at finally confronting part of his past, but also a growing sense that there were still many unanswered questions. Philippe had given him just enough information to know that the full truth was far more complicated than he'd imagined. When Luke returned to their office, he found Amira surrounded by documents, her hair slightly disheveled, a look of intense concentration on her face. I found something, she said without looking up. Hassan Rashid isn't just a passive observer in our project. He's connected to the very people who brought you down years ago. Luke moved closer, studying the documents. The connections were subtle but undeniable. A series of shell companies, financial transactions that seemed innocuous at first glance, but revealed a deeper, more sinister pattern when examined closely. We need to be careful, Luke warned. If Hassan realizes we're onto him, he could become dangerous. Amira's eyes flashed with determination. We're not backing down, not now, not when we've come this far. Their investigation took them deeper into a world of corporate intrigue. They discovered that Hassan was part of a larger network that had systematically targeted and destroyed promising businesses that threatened their established power structures. Luke's past wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was part of a calculated strategy to maintain control of certain market sectors. As they worked late into the night, piecing together the puzzle, the tension between them grew. What had started as a professional partnership had evolved into something much deeper. Stolen glances, moments of unexpected intimacy, the way they anticipated each other's thoughts, all spoke of a connection that went beyond their shared mission. One night, as they took a break from their investigation, Luke found himself looking at Amira differently. The soft lamplight caught her profile, highlighting her determination, her strength. We've come a long way, he said softly. Amira turned, catching his gaze. From that night in the bar to here, it feels like a lifetime ago. Their faces were close, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. For a moment, it seemed like everything might change. But the moment was interrupted by a phone call that would alter the course of their investigation forever. A mysterious source had reached out, offering information that could blow their entire case wide open. The caller claimed to have evidence that would not only clear Luke's name, but expose a massive corporate conspiracy. As Luke and Amira exchanged looks, they knew their journey was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The stakes were higher than ever, and the line between personal and professional had never been more blurred. Little did they know, Hassan Rashid was already making his own moves, preparing to counter their investigation with a plan that would test the limits of their relationship and their resolve. The storm was gathering, and nothing would be the same after what was about to unfold. The anonymous tip came with precise instructions, a secure location, a specific time, and a warning that would change everything. Luke and Amira approached the meeting with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The rendezvous point was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Paris, a place that seemed to exist in the liminal space between the city's glamour and its hidden underbelly. Amira had insisted on bringing Marie from Le Coeur Brisé, trusting her instincts and the woman's street smart. Wisdom. I don't like this, Marie muttered as they approached the warehouse. Something feels off. Luke squeezed Amira's hand, a gesture that had become increasingly natural between them. We've come too far to turn back now, he said softly. As they entered the warehouse, the air felt thick with tension. Shadows danced across concrete walls, and the only sound was the echo of their footsteps. A single figure waited in the center of the vast space, a woman, her back turned to them. When she turned, Amira gasped. The woman was familiar, a former executive from Luke's old company, someone he had worked closely with years ago. Claudine, Luke said, surprise evident in his voice. What are you doing here? Claudine Laurent looked different from the polished corporate executive Luke remembered. Her eyes were haunted, her movements nervous. I'm here to tell you the truth, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, about what really happened to your company, about the network that destroyed you. The story she began to tell was complex and shocking. It wasn't just about corporate sabotage. It was about a sophisticated system of manipulation that reached into the highest levels of business and government. Hassan Rashid was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. As Claudine spoke, Marie's instincts proved correct. Something wasn't right. The warehouse felt too quiet, too staged. We're being watched, Marie whispered, her hand moving subtly to her side, where Amira knew she kept a small, concealed protection device. Just then, the warehouse erupted with movement. Shadows converged from multiple directions. Professional, operatives who moved with military precision. Luke instinctively pushed Amira behind him, while Marie positioned herself strategically. Run! Luke shouted, creating a diversion that would allow Amira and Marie to escape. But Amira was not the type to run. She had learned too much, come too far to back down now. Instead, she pulled out a device Luke had helped her develop, a sophisticated recording and tracking tool that could capture and transmit their entire encounter. The next few moments were a blur of movement and sound. Claudine disappeared in Timan, the chaos, her revelations hanging in the air like a half-finished sentence. Luke fought with a skill that surprised even Amira. Years of street survival had honed his survival instincts. Marie, despite her age, proved to be a formidable opponent. Her years of managing a tough neighborhood bar had taught her how to handle herself in difficult situations. As quickly as the confrontation began, it ended. The attackers melted away, leaving behind more questions than answers. But Amira's device had captured everything: Claudine's testimony, the attack, the voices of their assailants. In the aftermath, huddled in a safe house Marie knew about, they began to piece together the information. The network Claudine had described was vast and intricate. It wasn't just about corporate control. It was about maintaining a system that protected certain powerful individuals at the expense of everyone else. Hassan is just a middleman, Luke said, studying the information they had gathered. There are people behind him with much more to lose. Amira's mind was racing. Their Bridge the Gap project was more than just a social initiative now. It had become a direct threat to a powerful network that would do anything to maintain its control. As dawn broke, casting soft light through the safe house windows, Amira and Luke found themselves closer than ever. Their hands intertwined, a silent communication passing between them. They had faced danger together and survived. We can't stop now, Amira said, her voice filled with determination. Everything we've worked for, everything we've discovered, it's bigger than us now. Luke nodded, pulling her closer. Together, he whispered. But even as they found strength in each other, they knew the real battle was just beginning. Hassan Rashid would not take this challenge lightly. The network they had exposed would fight back with everything they had. Their project, their relationship, their very lives were now at stake. And the next move would determine everything. The storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived. The days following the warehouse incident were a testament to Amira and Luke's resilience. They knew they were being watched, tracked, their every move scrutinized by forces determined to silence them. Their Bridge the Gap project became both their shield and their weapon. Karim Al-Fayed called his daughter, his voice a mixture of concern and pride. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Amira," he said. "Are you prepared for the consequences?" Amira's response was unwavering. "I've never been more ready, Baba. What we've uncovered is too important to back down now." They began to strategically release information, carefully curated pieces of evidence that would make it difficult for Hassan and his network to retaliate without exposing their own corruption. Each revelation was like a precision strike, calculated to maximize impact while protecting their sources. The participants of Bridge the Gap became their greatest allies. People like Aisha, Marcus, and others who had been given a second chance now stood as living proof of the program's potential. They shared their stories, creating a groundswell of public support that made it increasingly difficult for their opponents to discredit them. But Hassan Rashid was not one to be defeated easily. One morning, Amira received a direct threat. Carefully worded message arrived at her office, ostensibly from a business contact but laden with subtle warnings. The subtext was clear: back off or face the consequences. Luke's past investigation took an unexpected turn when Philippe Moreau reached out again. This time he offered more than cryptic hints. He provided documented evidence of the network's operations, including connections that reached into government circles. "Be careful," Philippe warned during their clandestine meeting. "These people don't play by any rules." The pressure began to mount from multiple directions. Some of the Al Fayed board members started to distance themselves from the project. Investors became nervous. The carefully constructed world of corporate social responsibility they had built began to show cracks. But Amira and Luke refused to break. Their relationship, forged in the crucible of their shared mission, had become their greatest strength. Late nights were spent not just strategizing, but supporting each other. Luke's street-learned wisdom complemented Amira's corporate acumen perfectly. One evening, as they worked in their shared office, the tension between them became something more than professional. "We could walk away," Luke said softly, looking at Amira. "No one would blame us." Amira met his gaze, her eyes blazing. "With determination. And let them win? Never." The moment hung between them, charged with emotion and unspoken feelings. Their hands touched, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. But their moment of intimacy was short-lived. Hassan made his move, a coordinated attack designed to destroy everything they had built. False allegations were leaked to the press, fabricated. Documents suggested impropriety in the Bridge the Gap program. Their most vulnerable participants were targeted with subtle but devastating attempts to discredit them. The attack was surgical, designed to dismantle their credibility piece by piece. Marie from Le Coeur Brisé became an unexpected ally. Her network of street contacts provided crucial intelligence, helping them stay one step ahead of their attackers. "These corporate sharks," Marie would say, her eyes twinkling with defiance, "they've never met someone from the streets who knows how to fight back." As the pressure intensified, Amira and Luke realized they needed a bold move. They couldn't just defend. They needed to go on the offensive. A plan began to take shape. They would use the very weapons Hassan had used against them: information, strategic revelation, public opinion. But they would do it with a precision that would leave their opponents with nowhere to hide. Their final move was about to begin. Everything they had worked for, everything they had discovered, would come down to the next few days. The network thought they could break Amira and Luke. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As the sun set over Paris, casting long shadows, across the city, Amira and Luke stood together, their hands intertwined. The battle was far from over, but they were ready. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The final confrontation was approaching, and nothing would ever be the same. The final act of their battle began on a crisp autumn morning. Amira and Luke had meticulously prepared their strategy, gathering every piece of evidence, every testimony, every connection that would expose the network Hassan represented. They chose their venue carefully, a press conference that would be broadcast live, streamed globally, with key journalists and influencers invited. The location was symbolic: Le Coeur Brisé, the very bar where their journey had begun. Marie had transformed the space, removing the usual tables to create a makeshift press room. The regulars who had supported Amira and Luke from the beginning stood in the background, a testament to the community they had built. As cameras rolled and journalists settled into their seats, Amira stepped forward. She was no longer just an heiress or a businesswoman. She was a catalyst for change. "Today, we're going to tell you a story," she began, her voice steady and powerful. "A story about power, corruption, and the human potential that exists in the margins of our society." Luke stood beside her, a visual representation of their journey. Together, they began to unravel the complex web of corporate manipulation that had destroyed his previous life and threatened their current mission. The evidence was overwhelming. Documented financial transactions, testimony from whistleblowers, connections that traced back to the highest levels of corporate and governmental circles. They didn't just expose Hassan Rashid, they revealed an entire system designed to maintain power at the expense of human potential. But they didn't just present problems, they offered solutions. The participants of Bridge the Gap took the stage one by one. Aisha, the refugee who had become a tech innovator. Marcus, a former factory worker who had developed a revolutionary manufacturing process. Each story was a powerful testament to the program's success. Hassan Rashid, watching the broadcast from his office, realized too late that he had underestimated Amira and Luke. The network he represented was crumbling, exposed in real time to a global audience. As the press conference concluded, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support. Other corporations began to reach out, wanting to understand and potentially replicate their approach. In the days that followed, investigations were launched. Some of the most powerful players in the network found themselves under scrutiny, their carefully constructed facades crumbling. But for Amira and Luke, the real victory was more personal. That evening, back at Le Coeur Brisé, they finally allowed themselves a moment of true intimacy. The professional barriers that had existed between them dissolved, revealing a deep, profound connection. "We did it," Amira whispered, her hand intertwined with Luke's. Luke smiled, the weight of his past finally lifting. "No," he corrected her. "We did it together." Their Bridge the Gap program was more than a corporate initiative. It had become a movement, a proof that systemic change was possible when people were willing to challenge the status quo. Karim Al-Fayed, watching his daughter from afar, felt a mix of pride and amazement. The little girl he had once tried to protect had become a force of nature, changing the world on her own terms. As for Hassan Rashid, he found himself increasingly isolated. The network he had been part of was dismantling, his connections severed, his influence rapidly diminishing. Months later, Bridge the Gap had expanded globally. Similar programs were being developed in major cities around the world, inspired by Amira and Luke's model of inclusive innovation. Their personal relationship had also transformed. They were partners in every sense, in love, in business, in their mission to create meaningful change. As they stood on the balcony of their shared office overlooking Paris, Amira turned to Luke. "What's next?" she asked. Luke's smile was full of promise. "Whatever we want to do, together."